right, we are live. You are about to enjoy a Firearms Radio Network podcast. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. If you'd like to throw us some free love and support, feel free to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or anywhere you're listening to this podcast. And then tonight's episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. To check out some other great podcasts, visit the Firearms Radio Network at firearms-related.net. And then our other show sponsor is the RangeBuddy.App. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, I think you're missing out. Head over to your local app store, iOS or Android, the Google Play Store, and you can download the RangeBuddy Pro. It's a collection of over 130 shooting drills, sorted by the required target type and filterable by the skills worked. The virtual firearms instructor is pretty freaking awesome. If you're like me and you don't have any friends, or your only friend is Andy who's working all the time and can't get out to the range, you take this out there, throw it in your pocket, and it will give you random commands and a whole bunch of other stuff. So RangeBuddy.App, go to RangeBuddy.App, or just pull it up on your phone and get it that way. Tonight, we are going to be talking to Erick. You guys might recognize Erick from a few weeks ago. He's back with us. We're going to be discussing his pistol-mounted optics instructor course. And for those folks that listen to podcasts, you might recognize his student, Brian, from the Off Duty, On Duty podcast. So let's get into it. Looking forward to the great conversation that we're going to have tonight. Your hosts are, as always, these two yahoos, Jeremy, that's me, Andy, that's the guy right below me with the bald head and the nice beard. So, Erick, talk to us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the firearms training industry.
So briefly, like a lot of folks in the business, prior military, did a full career in law enforcement. Along the way, both in the Army and in law enforcement, had teaching assignments, jobs that put me in a position to teach. In 2000, I ended up starting the apprentice program down at Gunsight. I'd been a student there for about 6 years. Came on staff in 2001, been teaching down there since then. Was also teaching for my office. It was about a 300 deputy sheriff's office up in Northern California. Was the lead instructor there. And then when I promoted, I took over the program as the sergeant running it. So I was doing that with teaching at Gunsight, teaching at the office. As I got close to retirement, I spun up my own company, Cougar Mountain Solutions, which is named after a terrain feature in my county. It's a big mountain at the south end of the county, or hill. And so that kind of went from there on it.
Terrain feature.
Yeah, it's a hill. It's not really a mountain, but it's a hill. It has nothing to do with anything else that word might imply. Didn't even think about that.
Man, you got a baboon over your shoulder. Talk to us a little bit about that before we get into the class.
So along the way, I've had a chance to do a few things on the planet. One of them was a couple trips to Africa. Both hunts over there, baboons are considered predators, and kind of like hogs in Texas, most of the places will encourage depredation and taking of the baboons. So on both hunts, I managed to, shot a few baboons, and that's one of the ones I brought back. I think it was the first hunt. I'm not positive though. Could have been the second. Took a Cape buffalo and a few other critters on those trips.
Good deal, man. That definitely sounds like a bucket list item. Brian, talk to us a little bit about your background in the firearms training world and what brought you to Erick's pistol-mounted optics instructor course.
Oh man, I'll give you the condensed version. Like I grew up in a gun shop from the time I was about 7. So I was always kind of tuned into the industry, even back to the revolver to auto transition for the whole world, right? And I started out shooting red dot optics at like 9 years old, and then did a 4-year stint in the 82nd Airborne. Went to some cool guy schools, whatever. And then I spent 21 years at the largest agency in Oklahoma, which is the Oklahoma City Police Department, and got into their firearms training program pretty early. just due to some circumstances. I was on the pistol team and was shooting police pistol competitions and stuff like that, and became an adjunct instructor, and just saw how like catastrophically archaic our training programs were. And then I'd always dabbled with red dots. And then I saw, just in about 2018, I saw this real like gadget centric focus on training as opposed to training. And what led me to Erick's class is he had really done a lot of the legwork on the operational side of red dots, as opposed to the USPSA, IDPA, or whatever a competition side. And I have my own training company. After I retired from the PD, I've had a training company for about 7 years. And I started seeing more and more students show up with red dot or pistol mounted optics. And that was what ultimately led me to go to his course, was just to kind of see, well, to back that bus up a lot. Erick and I think a lot alike. And I saw this real void in the training world between the people that were really promoting the pistol mounted optic versus the people that were operationally using it. And Erick was one of the people that I kind of trusted as a source that had operationally implemented that. So that's how I ended up with in his instructor course.
That's awesome. Erick, talk to us a little bit about the course requirements, the minimum round count, the required gear, and is there a minimum skill set that a student must have prior to attending the class?
So most of the class times I've run the class, it's been run for law enforcement, for people who are already instructing for their agencies. The class that Brian took was a first run where we ran it as a hybrid, open to both decent, normal human beings and law enforcement. I'd been wanting to do it for a while, but I wasn't sure kind of what the initial threshold was going to be. On the law enforcement side, we know we've got documented schools, both, state or national, standard schools that we could run off of. What I finally settled on was, at least for the first run, was folks who'd been through the first two classes in Tom Given's, the Range Master Instructor Development Program. So not only the instructor development, but the advanced instructor course. The reason for that was there were standards, there were shooting standards for that. And they also had at least a bare minimum, the same amount of hours as somebody coming out of a basic law enforcement firearms instructor school. In both cases, yeah, you can definitely coach. You can probably run a line okay, coming out of those equivalent programs. And that was how I looked at it. Round count, without going back and looking at my notes off the top of my head, I think it's about 650, 700 for the class. Equipment wise would be what you would normally carry. So for cops, a duty belt, mid or full size pistol, optics, couple spare magazines, bring a flashlight. Because I get into low light with it, which is something that I hadn't seen in other pistol mounted optics classes or dot classes. On the decent normal human side, folks teaching, who are citizens teaching citizens, bring what your normal carry gear would be, as long as you can shoot it for 2 full days. Right. So, if it's a subcompact pistol that you really can't reload in a hurry, probably not the thing to bring, right? Probably more like a M&P compact, a Glock 19, maybe something more in that area for folks that aren't in the military side. And then have a holster that will work, have the ability to carry a couple spare magazines on you, some loose ammo in your pocket, and be able to get to the flashlight when we go to that segment of it. And then the rest of the stuff we kind of talk about as we go and introduce it when it comes in there, like care and feeding of the optic, use cat crap, the product, right? Not the actual cat material, but bring that, be able to have that in there when we talk about working, inclement weather issues or things along those lines. Eye and ear protection, obviously. Notebooks and note taking stuff is huge. If you bring a thumb drive, I'll give folks a huge dump of info. From law enforcement, private sector, academia, but bring a notebook and take notes and ask questions and try to give you the answers things that will help you going down the road. Not that I have all the answers, but a lot of times we can kick stuff around and maybe find here's a way and here's a better way that's worked for somebody else, and bring that into the material too.
You mentioned when you were talking about the advanced instructor level through Range Master, those instructors have about the same amount of training as a law enforcement instructor coming out. And then you mentioned that they, that they can run a line and coach shooters fairly well. I want to dig into that a little bit more, because I don't think it's a conversation that I've really had the opportunity to get into with an instructor. And as somebody that teaches folks how to teach other, like, the entry-level student or the end user, what are some challenges you think new instructors face, specifically with regards to running a safe and efficient line?
Being able to catch what's wrong. We all know what right looks like, but you've got to be able to catch that something's off or it's outright wrong. So can you pick up the thing that's different from everybody else? And it may be a sound. It might be something out of the corner of your eye or your peripheral vision where you're just like, that's wrong. I got to go pay attention to that right now. And being able to go pause everything in whatever manner is necessary for the situation, either calling a complete ceasefire or devoting your attention to that one person without like losing track of everything that's going on, to be able to sit there and address that issue. Right. And the way I run the instructor classes, it's a coach shooter thing the whole way. So everybody's partnered up with someone else. So by having people who have some level of experience coaching and running a line, working one-on-one with each other, they're getting a chance to see where folks are having problems, coming up with ways to communicate the material to people who are different, have different backgrounds from them, and be able to work that part of the teaching problem, as well as seeing how a line gets run, seeing the material that needs to be hit. I can't remember who said it, but somebody called the way I teach a lot like the Socratic method, where rather than me telling you this is how you solve this problem, let's talk about the problem and what are the ways to solve it. Sometimes there's only one right answer. Other times there may be different ways to get to the same endpoint. And part of the instructor development is figuring out that, way A works great for me, but I've got to know B, C, and D to be able to reach everybody else, and understand that I can't shoehorn everybody into a size 10 wide shoe, that I have to give as a teacher, other people as teachers should be able to give folks different answers, different ways to solve that problem. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Hey, Brian, what did you learn as far as myth dispelling on a red dot that you would learn to be able to share with other students?
Did you say myth dispelling?
Myth dispelling, yeah. For example, of like he mentioned using cat crap, right? And everybody thinks, well, I can't run a red dot in the rain. I'm gonna have issues like that. Does he cover anything like that?
I know where Erick's brain went right now, but and this is not to sound jaded, but on the myth busting side, not much. And I say that's not a knock at Erick's curriculum or anything. We understand how how that piece of equipment works now, and you're talking instructor level course. And I think when we say instructor level course, that's a bit of a misnomer for a lot of the industry. This was a sheer T3 course. I'm going to teach you how to teach people to teach this, or how to permeate this. So there wasn't a lot of dispelling myth. It was identifying challenges you might have with a red dot and the methods that we use to overcome those. So it wasn't, I spend a lot of time myth busting the fundamentals. You were expected to be proficient and a safe gun handler by the time you were in Erick's course. So that stuff's already out the window. It's how do you adapt this piece of equipment into your training program? So there wasn't really a myth busting side of it, so to speak.
Well, let me turn.
I was just, if I can jump in, Andy,
Yeah.
like the one about the rain, right? The water. So it was funny. A couple years ago, we were teaching the class down at Gunsight, and we had the summer monsoon. So we're actually on the range in the rain with the red dots. We do a quick video about shooting dots in the rain. And the very first comment was, you can't shoot a red dot in the rain. It's raining and we're shooting them on video. I do what I think is a fairly in-depth block on broken and blocked optics. And if your optic goes down or it gets occluded because of environmental considerations, right? Be that humidity, be it you just went prone in the dirt and now you got to stand up and get your pistol into play, whatever. And the last part of that is I bust the myth about shooting the dot in the rain. And it's simple. I bring out a squirt bottle and we squirt water on your optic and we have you shoot a drill a couple of times. The dot works.
Really,
end of discussion.
I feel really bad because Eric, and he used me and he poked a hole in the top of a water bottle. And I'm talking, I filled his optic with water. And I didn't realize that was maybe not the intended outcome. But he goes, here, use this. And I went, and he picks the optic up. And just this deluge of water falls out of it. And he goes, dude, how much did you put in there? I don't know. But to his credit, that was really, of all the things, that was kind of one of the things that Eric attacked as people tell you can't do this. And here's an actual live action demo that you can. But also from the standpoint of certain optics don't work real good that way either. Right. So,
yeah, I guess let me. So I'll build back on the question because I think you dispelled maybe some myths, Eric, but just kind of inadvertently, right? Brian mentioned that this was a tier 3 class instructor course, so a lot of the things that people should be expected to know to get into your class. I guess the question I would have is, how do you vet that? Because I've been to some instructor level courses. And I see some instructors that I'm not so sure you're quite there yet. So how do you get to that?
And that was what led to me doing it with the RangeMaster staff, right? The RangeMaster instructor development classes. I know there's other programs out there for decent normal human beings that are certifying bodies. I've seen folks come through classes at Gunsight and at RangeMaster TACCons, folks who've had those backgrounds. And noticed that they fell into the category you were just talking about, right? Maybe they're not necessarily ready to do the hybrid class, to do it where we could have decent normal human beings and cops on the range together learning to teach it, and not it devolve into, this is how you put a lesson plan together, but hey, this is how you teach the dot. I had to choose a level somewhere that was, not only choose a level, but choose one that was attainable, right? That you could get folks who'd been through. So Tom and the RangeMaster crew have been teaching that class long enough, widespread enough, that I thought it would be a reasonable starting point for that. And my position from behind the line in most cases was that everybody that was there, either with at least a week-long law enforcement school or at least 5 days of Tom Given's instructor development programs, were able to perform that at that level, at the level where we needed them. Right? We weren't trying to teach them to teach. They knew how to teach. They were safe. They could handle the guns effectively. They could shoot well. It was just trying to make sure that they had enough coming to it that they were able to pay attention to learning, to picking up the stuff I was trying to pass on about teaching the dot, rather than having to learn how to teach. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I was going to ask you, how did that, looking back on it, was it a sound decision that requirement? But it's you answered that, right? It looks like it worked out well putting that prereq on there. So does that continue to be the prerequisite for the course?
Yeah, if anytime I get a chance to run the hybrid version of it, hopefully, more law enforcement agencies will be like, hey, we'll host this, and we'll allow decent normal humans in, or I'll get somebody who wants to host the class at their range. and we could do it with both law enforcement and normal humans, that will be the prerequisite, right? Either a 40-hour state nationally recognized LE instructor course, or 40 hours of Tom Givens range master instructor.
Looking at that student base, we had Robert Vogel on last night, and he does a lot of instructing for law enforcement. And a common sentiment that instructors have is, if it's an agency required course, it's easy for the instructor to pick that out, right? Because those guys are a little bit less motivated to be there than somebody who's paying their own dime. Are you seeing that same kind of trend in this class, or is it more of an elective for those law enforcement and trainers to sign up and take this class with you?
I've been fortunate, and the folks that have took it LE-wise all wanted to be in the classes. Every time I've taught it, the people who were there as part of their job wanted to be there for the class. I can't think of anybody I've had that was ordered to be there and like, oh, I'm going under protest, right? And quite frankly, I really don't want that kind of person in an instructor class. I did enough of it during my time in law enforcement, I'm sure Brian did, where you had people that the only time you saw them was they were ordered to be there. Oh, I've got to qualify this quarter, or I have to attend this training. Okay, I'll go, but only because I have to. I don't really want to teach that anymore. I want to teach people who want to be there. It makes it more enjoyable.
Yeah, I could see that would get pretty old fast. Let me ask you this question on the line of law enforcement too, because everybody jokes about, most cops can't shoot, and I'm still not sold that I'm going to say that most still can't. But would you say now with the technology and the amount of instructors out there, are we seeing more law enforcement getting into private level classes or civilian side classes, or do you think it's just kind of hit or miss?
I still don't think we're seeing the majority of cops go to classes on their own time. People who did like I did through the vast majority of my career, paying for additional training, that's not the norm. And take a look at any profession you're in, right? You guys do when you're not on the podcast, and tell me how many people will shell out their own money and their own vacation time to go to extra classes, right? The difference is citizens, decent normal human beings that are in this area generally really want to be there. And the ones that take training very seriously. So it's a weird dynamic of we're taking folks who this is their avocation and comparing them to people who, quite frankly, view a pistol sometimes like a ballpoint pen. Right. I think over the last several years, we've started to see a trend, though. Maybe people are taking stuff more seriously on the LE side, not to the point of going to schools, but maybe because they're understanding that there may be a greater consequence to some of this than there was before. They at least may be taking formal training better. The problem is, if there is a problem, and there is, it's agencies not funding the training or taking it seriously, and not putting in people that can actually teach it and want to do it.
That makes much more sense. I recently did our local county sheriff citizen police academy, and just kind of as a shithead, the guy that was running, I was like, hey, that's a cool gun you got there. What kind is it? And he's like, I don't know. I think it's a Glock or something. I don't know. I'm not into guns. And I just kind of giggled, I was like, oh, you're the one. But do you think maybe, Brian, that the other thing I'm seeing, and it's just from a civilian standpoint, I'm seeing many other law enforcement agencies allowing more firearms. They're not stuck with the old Glock 22 or the Glock 17. They're getting to have their own firearms. Opportunity for red dots now. Do you think that maybe this will bring more law enforcement into the training industry, or do you still think it's just kind of be where it is?
No. And I worked for an agency that had probably the most liberal firearms policy ever. Basically service size pistol, and the chief wants to sign off on that as an approved weapon. I'm sorry, but the Springfield XD is not a service pistol. It's not. But for years, I saw hundreds of people buy those to the point that in an LE agency, when you fire 25 to 50 rounds a year, they're fine. you put them through a high volume class and they crap out quick. Most cops will never know that. So when the red dot or pistol mounted optic thing came in, I watched administrators go, well, what options do we have out there that are pistol mounted optic available? And that policy got even more liberal. And, I racked my brain and went, we're in a heyday. We're in a golden era right now of reliability and accuracy with polymer striker fired pistols. We just are. I mean, that's where the technology is advanced. There's no reason an agency shouldn't just blanket, hey, this is our approved duty weapon for uniform service. There's no excuse for that at this point, which contradicts 25-year-old me versus 45-year-old me, right? But so it does not bolster any of the additional training outside of the agency. It has really no effect, if that answered your question. So
one of the way the class works is, and this class that Brian was in was the first time we had done it. We did all the lecture material the night before, checked on everybody's guns, did all the lecture material, and tried to make it work both for the citizen trainers that were in the class and for the cops in the class. And one of the interesting areas is, okay, as an agency, how do you set up your approved optics list? What's your policy? How do you implement maintenance on these? How do you implement the training? And still trying to make it relevant for the citizens to where they're not hitting the snooze button. But we talk about those things. I'm still a fan of, I wouldn't make everybody wear a pair of size 10 Denner Acadias. So I'm a fan of like having a couple options both on handguns and on optics. Whether folks are going to carry the optics or not, everybody goes through the training, because at a minimum, you're going to understand how the system works and you're going to get a bunch of dedicated trigger time, which selfishly isn't for the liability reasons. That's probably outside of the academy, the most shooting training most folks are going to get. And if I can get them, or an agency can get them back on the range for another 16 hours of firearms training at some point during their career, where they're having to get a sight picture and align a sighting system, whether it's iron sights or the dot, and manipulate the trigger without screwing all of that up. And they've got to deal with malfunctions and they've got to keep the gun running. It's going to be a chance to get them back on the range for a bunch of dedicated time and rounds. Because reality of it is, there's not a whole lot of people doing 5 minutes to dry practice a couple of times a week. Never mind 45 minutes a day.
That makes sense. Brian, you mentioned you had close to 2 decades of law enforcement experience and a good bit of that time as a firearms instructor. Coming into this course, what were some of the challenges that you saw or experienced either for yourself or you saw other students have?
Well, in general, there was a wide base of both guns, ammo, and optic combinations, direct mounts, plates, whatever it was. And I have to view things nowadays through like 3 lenses. So agency lens, normal earth people lens, and then I even have like the military lens there. And understanding that all 3 of those have a different mission set and a different set of equipment. And one of the things I saw was a lot of your cop-centric people kind of stuck with a formula. A lot of your civilian-centric people, it was, well, I heard this was good, so I bought this on this gun that I heard that was good. And then on the mill side, you kind of look at it as what's best for the masses. So that wasn't there. But what was your original question was? Give me that again.
What were some challenges that the other students had, or that you witnessed had?
Challenges I saw with the other students was a lot of unfamiliarity across a wide variety of platforms. whether it be, hey, this person's shooting a macro with a SIG macro with a holosun. This guy's shooting a 509T on a Glock. This guy's shooting a G48 with some home woven direct mounted whatever, and just trying to bridge the gap between, is that the gun, the optic, or the person? That was one of the things I kind of keyed in on that. And like I said, I look at those things through those three different lenses, but there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of gun, optic, and plates and mounting system combinations out there that are kind of in the unknown, and they can kind of add layers of complexity to a system that's already somewhat complex. So that would be that.
I was just going to say, I would say if that was a complication of dots, I think that you hit the nail on the head. Of it's become overwhelming now to try to be able to adapt your gun to the plate, to the optic, to which one works and which one doesn't, and it can get overwhelming pretty quickly.
Yeah, and on that, I'm starting to see the industry, and I'm talking about the broader industry of the firearms world, give more options to, if you buy this gun, you can put this optic on it with 2 screws, right? As opposed to, okay, you've got an optic cut, but I need you to go to Jim Bob's machine shop and buy these screws, and I need you to go to Billy Ray's plate machinist and get this plate so that it's a reliable setup. And that stuff, as an instructor, that adds a mountain of complexity to, oh, wow, I've never seen that particular gun optic plate mounting system combination. And to Erick's credit, he really, and disclaimer, Erick and I are buds, but he addresses a lot of that stuff right up front. So, but that's something that even, I'll give an example for me. I was shooting a Springfield Prodigy with a 509T on Springfield's plate, and I'm partnered with Chuck Haggard, who's shooting a Holosun SCS on a Glock 17 MOS. We're not speaking the same language as far as mounting systems and all that. Now, we're both instructor level dudes, so we were able to bridge that language gap pretty easy. But it's like, hey, what kind of sights are those? What's the dot size? What color is it? How are you mounted to that gun? So that's something that with pistol mounted optics is just, there's a dictionary of combinations out there.
And that's one thing that I think, I know I've been fortunate on, is teaching down at Gunsight. I don't just see a full-size Glock with an RMR come through. I see a fair amount of everything that's out there come through classes. 2 weeks ago, taught, it was an intermediate pistol class, but it ended up being an optic class, because on Monday morning we had 8 dots and 7 sets of irons, and Tuesday morning we had 15 dots and 3 sets of irons. But one of the students had, and it was a SIG, but I'm not going down this road because it's a SIG, aftermarket frame with a very different grip angle than I had seen before. The slide had been milled for a plate, and I don't know if it came that way or not, but I had never seen a 1/4 inch thick mounting plate for an optic. Then it had a Leupold Delta Point Pro on it. And no matter which one of us picked that gun up, we couldn't find the dot. What we ended up having to do was, instead of like shooting a Glock where there's this belief that you have to drive the muzzle down, we would get to extension and have to crank the muzzle up just to find the dot. And it felt like it was coming exceedingly high to pick it up. And the student couldn't find the dot to save his life, no matter what we tried. So we ended up getting into a rental gun that had a more realistic plate. And I think somewhere in there was an MOA angle on that plate that we couldn't discern. And that whole combination was just out of whack. So fortunately now I've seen that. If I come across it again, I'm good. I got it. I can talk about it to folks, but I don't think I would have seen that organizationally.
Yeah. I want to stay on gear a little bit more as far as dots here for a second. There's guys they'll have a Glock 48 and they'll run a shield arms dot, and even though they were told not to, I'm not going to say any names or anything, but Jeremy, but
yeah, call me out.
Hey, it worked really good for the first like 75 rounds.
Exactly.
I made it to like 200 before my shield broke. My shield sight broke.
He learned his lesson. But going back to Range Master, right? Tom Givens is really heavy on that still of like he's not sold. I don't want to say exactly how, I don't want to make any assumptions or put words in his mouth, but he's not sold on dots exactly yet because of the amount of them that fail. Sure enough, when I was at Range Master, we had some failures. Do you track that on as far as your instructor course too, just to kind of get an idea of what you're seeing fail and what you're seeing not?
Yes. So not to burst Brian's bubble, but right after I retired in 2019, I had like back-to-back pistol classes down at Gunsight. And I had not seen an XD in a class for several years. We'd seen some correctional deputies carrying smaller ones, but I hadn't seen a mid-size or full-size XD in a class. So I get done with that 3 or 4 weeks of classes, and it was like, it dawned on me about the second week, like, hey, the XDs aren't breaking. The ones I'm seeing aren't breaking or falling apart. So I made a conscious decision to start tracking weather conditions, round count, what guns I saw in the class. And then once we started doing optics classes, what gun and optics combos I saw in the class. And it was kind of like the old Pat Rogers AAR, not necessarily as detailed as Pat would do them, but it was like, here was the weather, here was the round count, this was the nature of the class, here's what the students carried, here's what I saw with the guns and optics or ammo or whatever over the course of the week. And I have kept that going since 2019. And those are all posted on Lightfighter and pistol-forum.com. And I've started throwing them up on my social media. And I'll answer any questions folks have, but it's just gun, optic, and what we saw during the week so that folks can go back and take a look at it and kind of have some idea. We originally saw the same problems that I saw when I first started messing with pistol optics. A lot of optics failures. They were breaking mechanically or electronically. And I have a weird little engineering theory that I'm still trying to confirm. Then post 2020, we weren't seeing the optics fail anywhere near as much. We were seeing mounting failures go through the roof. We'd had mounting failures before, but mounting failures were going through the roof. This year, the mounting failures really seem to have, I won't say they've died off completely, but they're getting close to being dead in the classes this year. I would like to think that's because people have read articles I've written and talked about like the LA Sheriff's Department way of mounting them, which seems to be best, but I don't think that's it. I just think we've gotten a lot more gunsmiths and armorers that have gotten a handle on how to mount it correctly. And I think there's probably a few different ways to do it. I have the method that came from LA Sheriff's Department's weapons training unit that I have found to be pretty rock solid. Regardless, though, we're seeing better results in the mounting, so we're seeing fewer failures. Not saying they don't happen, we're just seeing fewer of them.
I want to circle back to the challenge. As an instructor for this course, what are some challenges that you're seeing for some of these students in the class? Is it along the same line that Brian had mentioned, where it's just the sheer amount of just problems and issues exponentially increase with the, and not in a negative way, right? But then now it's more with irons. It's like, hey, are they properly? Are they not? Did the rear sight shift or not?
Yeah. So equipment is just getting everybody on the same page, and that's part of what we do the first night is make sure everybody at least understands that we have some common verbiage. Where you see it on the range is we were able to be pretty sloppy with iron sights when you kind of think about our presentation and stuff because of how the eye's correcting how the brain processes things. We were able to be sloppy. Shooting the optics requires it requires more consistency on the end user getting it into play. And once you get that down, then you can start working some of the asymmetric or alternate positions. But it's getting them to accept the process of being consistent and not getting super frustrated when they aren't, right? And showing them, okay, when you're having these issues, glitches, failures, however you want to refer to it, back it up, try it again, right? Here's the fixes for it, because there's a couple different ones. Letting them figure out what works, and then also understanding how the other one works so they can communicate it. And sometimes you just got to put your hand on their shoulder and go, take a deep breath, take another deep breath, roll your shoulders, don't stress, right? We're going to get through this, and then kind of come back into it with them. So probably as much as anything else in the firearms training world, or the training world period, is the psychology too of, okay, how do I reach this person? You know, because what I can get away with Brian talking to him, because we both have the military and LE background, may not be the way I have to communicate with, you know, the gal who's middle-aged, upper middle class with a couple of daughters, who's never pointed a gun at another human being, but teaches defensive firearms use to other folks. Right? I have to know how to reach her and interact with her differently from somebody whose background similar to mine, you know, or somebody else in the LE world. So it's also trying the psychology, the analogies and stuff.
That makes sense. Brian, what was it might be a dumb question to ask somebody that has, you know, the experience that you have, but what was one of your biggest takeaways from this class as an instructor?
That most instructor classes aren't. I don't mean that I'm not being the slightest bit contrite. Yeah, I've been through a host of open enrollment training, instructor level training, low light instructor level training, all these different in the military, in law enforcement, paying for my open enrollment, whatever. And Erick's class is an absolute how to teach people to teach. When I hear the word, oh, this is an instructor level class, nowadays well, actually for a lot of years, I was pretty jaded going, oh, that was a, how do I get better at shooting class? Erick's class, my biggest takeaway was he teaches people how to teach, and how specifically how to teach the pistol mounted optics setup. That was a huge takeaway that I applaud him for it. And again, the disclaimer, Erick and I are buds, but I walked out of that class going, wow, you mean an instructor level course that meant that I needed to be able to teach people how to do this? Yeah. Well, there's a novel concept that should be implied in the word instructor level course. But a lot of our industry does not subscribe to the, you should be able to teach somebody to do this when you leave. And Erick was really good at covering all the bases, whether it be for agency level, individual level, et cetera, and laying out those, what would you call it, SOPs or processes, all the way down to the mounting of the optic, the process that you use to teach a shooter or a new shooter, or, you know, somebody that's never shot a dot before. These are the things you need to cover to be able to do that. And this is the sustainment that you need to achieve to make them proficient. And that was a real breath of fresh air for, you know, taking courses. So that was my big takeaway, is a lot of instructor courses are instructor in name only.
So the way this class came about was, as I was getting ready to retire, Gunsight dropped a couple of projects in my lap. Ken Campbell, the CEO of Gunsight. One was rewrite the student handbook for the pistol classes, which took me a couple years, but I got it done. The other project was to develop a red dot pistol curriculum, pistol mounted optics curriculum for Gunsight. And I put my first dot on a gun in 2010. All of 2012, I carried a dot on duty. And the challenge back then, just one of the many was holsters. Like we were taking Safariland holsters and cutting them up with EMT shears, so we could get a dot into the hole. Get a dot gun into the holster. Broke a number of optics that year. Walked away from the dots for a while. When I came back to it, went and started taking a series of classes on them, and then also started taking instructor classes from other folks that were offering them. Really good material in some of the classes. Classes changed my mindset on how I was looking at the dot and how I was using them. That was the first big thing. And then, but some of the stuff I saw in the classes weren't always geared towards teaching. And there was one where here's our drills, go shoot our drills for the next 3 hours. None of the instructors were coming by talking to us in an instructor class about how to teach or shoot those drills. And that kind of had an impact. So when I got ready to run the first dot class down at Gunsight, summer of 2020, I got a phone call from John Chapman with Forge Tactical. And John used to be one of Pat Rogers' AIs. And Pat was a huge influence on me in the teaching world. And John's like, we need a good LE focused instructor class for this. And John was the guy who kind of steered that. And then I had a state police agency in New England reach out to me like, hey, we need an instructor class on this. And we like the way you do stuff. Will you put one together? So it was outside people coming and asking, based on what we were doing at Gunsight, if I could put together an instructor development class for agencies on this. And then from there it grew into, hey, can you do this as a hybrid?
That's it brings up a good point, because I definitely see that sentiment, and it's one of those things where it's I don't know if it's marketing or if it's just folks don't know how to teach people how to teach. But what do you think you kind of sets your level of instruction apart from other folks?
I think twofold. One's I did the academic thing. I've been through, my undergrad and grad school. So I've got this whole nerd research science thing going on in my background where I want to go look at stuff. The other side of it is, as much as I loved a lot of the operational assignments in law enforcement that I had, the thing that I enjoyed the most was being a field training officer, where I would get somebody in my car for 3-4 weeks at a shot, teaching them how to be a cop or making sure they could work at our within the agency's parameters. And I think that taught me a lot about the psychology of teaching people. Because I had to work with a wide variety of folks, regardless of how they came out of the paint shop, the body shop, how they were plumbed, right? I had to figure out a way to reach them during 4 weeks in the car with them. And for most of my FTOs were really good, but I had one that I was surprised I made it into law enforcement after spending 2 weeks with that guy. But I learned a lot from there. And I think that's the stuff I bring over was because my classes are heavy. I have application classes, like how do we do this? But my low light instructor, my pistol mounted optics instructor are probably my two most popular classes. So they're about teaching people how to teach that subject. So I think it's just the teaching and training background that comes in that isn't necessarily standing on a line working with 10 to 20 people at a time. It's having worked one-on-one with folks in a car in all sorts of situations and teaching them how to do a job.
That makes sense. I want to talk a little bit about some of the drills that you, or I guess I want to kick it back over. I want to get Brian's perspective as a student. What did the class look like? We talked, you mentioned that day one, the night before is the lecture, the classroom stuff. But kind of give us the 10,000 foot overview of what the class looks like. What should a student expect coming into day one, coming into day two?
Well, to Erick's credit, the vetting process he did, we didn't have gun handling and marksmanship issues. The marksmanship issues were related to, can you find the dot and press the trigger when the dot's where it needs to be, right? But you didn't have gun handling issues. And 10,000 foot view. If you're a good gun handler and you have decent gear, you're going to be okay. Like that was the first thing that kind of set my mind at ease. And I didn't make it easy on myself, right? Like I was taking a pistol that a lot of people didn't have a lot of confidence in, and a mounting system, as kind of a personal challenge. And there was some other behind the scenes stuff going on, but yeah, I had the one Prodigato that ran 800 rounds and didn't have a hiccup. So anyway, aside from that, when you get into that class, you already need to be pretty well versed in adult learning and understand, you know, visual, tactile, and auditory learning theory. You kind of need to have a grasp on that, even if it's a rudimentary grasp. And the other thing, you need to be able to work with partners that are way above your skill set and way below your skill set. And that's really kind of the gist of how he structures that class. The lecture material sets the stage for kind of the expectations. And the expectations are not, you need to run a bill drill in sub 2 seconds. To me, that's kind of BS. Whatever. That's technical shooting skill. It's more like you need to understand adult learning, and you need to be able to convey that to another person who may have a higher skill set than you, but the pistol mounted optic is the equalizer here. Does that make sense? Like this is the X factor, and we're going to learn how to do this, and not only learn how to do this, but learn how to teach it to each other. That's kind of the 10,000 foot view. There was no real expectation of performance, because performance was just that was the extra icing on the cake. It was, how do you get normal earth people, cops, mill, whoever, to understand how to put this piece of equipment on their weapon system and how to use it to its maximum effectiveness. That was it. I actually did an AAR. I have a Patreon page and it's free. I did an AAR on Erick's class, which some in the shooting community absolutely crucified me for, because I said there was no real expectation that you need to perform X, Y, and Z drill in some time standard. It was, you're expected to be a good gun handler and be able to teach this material to another person. So that's the 10,000 foot view for me.
So kind of to dovetail on that, it is instructor class, right? So one of the things I hit on and keep going back to is the EDIP process: explain, demonstrate, imitate, practice. So everything we did, I'm explaining it and showing people what it looks like, right? Then letting them do it, then working through. And then we would go back. All right, what'd you see with the shooter you were working with? If you had an issue, how did you fix it? Does anybody have another way to do that? And we would work on. Class, one of the first things we did after making sure everybody could group was I run a drill called Good Enough. And it's learning how to accept an imperfect sight picture and still get the hit you want based on your trigger manipulation. Right. And then once I can see that people can group and that they can do the Good Enough drill, then I don't have to worry about trigger control issues. If I do, I'm going to fix the trigger control stuff right then and there with things I learned from guys like Larry Mudgett about how to teach trigger control and try to fix it. And then it's working the dot. First from a low ready position, because if you're a decent normal human being and your front door just exploded at 2 a.m, you're not drawing from a holster. You're going to have the gun in your hand in a ready position. If you're a working cop, when you're on a high risk stop or a contact, you're going to have the gun in your hand. Okay. Can people get the gun into play from a low ready? Right.
And this is where I say amen, by the way, Erick. So go ahead. Amen. Preach.
And then go into getting the gun into play from the holster, but not starting out with your hand gripping the pistol, starting out with the gun on target and working back to the holster. And then giving you several acquisitions of the dot from the pistol here, from the pistol where your hands meet up, and then finally starting from the holster. And then working all the shooting problems as we go, both from the low ready and from the holster, so that folks have an understanding of how to do it in different ways. It's not just drawing from a holster, because one of the pieces of feedback I hear from a bunch of folks is too many of these classes focus on the holster, not where the gun may already be when the event kicks off. So trying to do both from a teaching perspective. Over the course of it, firing singles, reacquiring the dot, firing doubles, reacquiring the dot, working target transitions like you would on a moving target, or working vertical transitions like you would working a failure drill. Then go into strong hand only shooting, which tees up low light shooting with the dot, which is an issue because most bad things happen when the sun goes down. So we need to give people a chance to shoot the dot in reduced light and see how that pans out for them. Get into shooting weak hand only. While it's not as big a deal for normal citizens, they could still get injured in an event and have to get the gun into play weak hand only. But law enforcement, we've got enough documentation that shows law enforcement officers do take rounds to the hand or forearm, and they may have to finish out the fight. Go into asymmetric or alternate positions in the class because you're trying to make use of cover, or you've ended up on the ground in the fight. And how do you get the pistol mounted optic out of the holster and into play when you're on your butt, when you're on your side?
When you're being attacked by fire ants.
Yeah. Public safety announcement. Fire ant mounds in Texas look radically different than they do in Arizona. So I didn't know I was going prone on a fire ant mound in Texas and paid the price for it. But I did continue to shoot until I finished the drill. Don't recommend that.
That's in the AAR that I did, by the way.
Yeah. So,
really quick on that. I just got to throw that in because the first time I went to Dallas, Texas, and I was working over there, and I saw this big giant dirt thing, and I was like, what the hell is that? Yeah. And then they told me, oh, that's fire ants, dude. Leave that alone. I go, I thought that was only in cartoons. That's real? And they're like, yes, very
real thing.
In Arizona, you'll see this like down at gun site, you'll see this like 8 to 10 foot wide barren circle with the cave going down in the center of it. That's fire ants, right? Okay, cool. Don't go stand there. Don't go prone there. Don't kneel there. Yeah, the fire ant mound was underneath like 8 inches of grass. So when I go prone in it to demonstrate these positions, my forearms went right down over the mouth of the ant hill, right? And I just got bit to snot. So here's a place where I will disagree with Brian, and it's maybe just perspective. I do have performance standards in the class, but they're par time and accuracy based, not pure speed based. So the two standards I have in the class, and they're shot towards the end, are Justin Dial's 5-yard roundup, draw from the holster to a single shot, work from the low ready with both hands on the gun to 4 shots, strong hand only 3 shots, weak hand only 2 shots. The way I run the drill is everything has to be in the black on the B8, and we run a 2.5 second par time. I get if you're slow, but don't miss, because that's a 5-yard drill. And then the other side of it, to me, probably the more important side, is a judgmental shooting drill that I run. And I have different ones for different classes, but they all require you to identify the threat target rather than just a single target in front of you. And rather than firing a number of shots to a number of places that I have just verbalized, you have to find the threat target in the mix, figure out what the threat target is telling you it's going to need to be shot in, and in order to solve the problem, and then you have to deliver the hits to that spot. So there's a par-based accuracy standards, and there's a judgment-based shooting standards class.
Yeah, and I think I kind of made maybe a misnomer there, or a grammatical error, or whatever you want to call it. There was standards, but they were not how fast can we run X, Y, and Z. It was much more discriminatory as far as targets and what needs to be addressed on said target, and then a reasonable expectation of, or a reasonable and realistic expectation of target zone and time versus let's see how fast we can press the accelerator.
And then kind of the final thing you were asking about the 10,000 foot view is, because it is a law enforcement instructor class, I have a written test that goes with it.
It was a good test, by the way.
And it's not, I'm not trying to compete with the SAT, right? But it's also not going to be a kindergarten see Dick run, see Jane run, right? It's, and then you asked earlier, I think Andy, it was you asked, what separates my stuff is we, at the end, with the time allowing, we're going to sit down and talk about the material in the class. And I want to make sure that you understand it and that I understand your perspectives on the material. What needs to be changed? Oh, well, let me back up. What was done right? What could be done better? What needs to stay in the curriculum? What needs to go away? Or what should I consider going away? And I'm not saying that everything that gets said, I'm going to immediately run out and change. Some stuff may not make sense to people, but it's in there for a reason based on my background or my perspective on it. But I want to hear the feedback. And I also want to get the students talking about the material in the class, so I know that they absorbed it. And if there's anything that they misunderstood or that I misstated, we can get it corrected before they roll out the gate.
Andy, do you want the 35-foot view? Because I think Eric was about 35 feet from me at the hot wash. One of the things I took from that class that was absolutely impactful to me, and the way that I teach every class I do going forward, I was smoked. I was tired. I was almost a heat casualty on the range, right? Like, that's the perspective. I'm kind of loopy, as you might say. And we did a 2.5 hour hot wash in Eric's class.
Now, that was because everybody was engaged.
Well, I will tell you this, though. You didn't let people not be engaged. And I thought that in my instructor notebook, that went in the notebook right then. And that hot wash, I learned as much in that hot wash as I did throughout the week. I've never been in another course that had a hot wash like that. That was, one, it was brutal. And two, and I mean brutal from physically and mentally, right? Because you're smoked, it's the end of a course, and you have to engage your brain. And two, it was honest, because Eric wouldn't allow it to not be honest. And that was very impactful for me as an instructor that does open enrollment schools and teaching contract to law enforcement and other people. I went, wow, this dude just opened his book and said, tear it apart. And I watched Eric sit up there and fill a notebook full of notes. And I'm smoked, and I'm looking at the instructor going, I know he's as tired as I am, because I've been in that position before. And he's sitting there filling a notebook with student comments and critiques, etc. And this is not me blowing smoke up Eric's skirt because he's my friend. That made a major impression on me. I thought, man, I'm a horrible instructor. I've never done anything like that. And it really, a lot of the information that maybe I had glossed over because I thought, well, I already knew that. I'm hearing that from other instructor level people that are telling me, when Eric talked about tighten the pinkies, that really unlocked the door to how I overcome XYZ. Or when Eric said XYZ, or, you put this in your curriculum and I think it would have been better here. And I'm going, man, this is brutal. But it's also one of the most valuable things I took from the course. So kudos for that, Eric. And for people that are maybe thinking about going to his pistol mounted optics course, bring some liquid IV or something, because that last 2.5 hours, you need to be engaged and you're going to be tired.
Now, just to comment on that, it was probably the most miserable day I've experienced in Texas. It was on a par with August in the Arizona desert and parts of the summer in the Middle East. I mean, we were like 115 on the range. We called the shooting part of the class at about 2:30 on Sunday, because we were going to have to actually stick people with IVs if I kept them out there any longer. There were things we didn't get to because of the weather, but that was part of why we were in the classroom.
I'm no slouch, but by the last exercise, I was looking at my brother, Hanny McMood, saying, dude, I don't know how much longer he's going to go, but I'm going to have to tap out, because I'm 43. I'm in reasonably good physical condition, and Erick was like the Energizer Bunny, and I'm going, bro, he's gonna call this any minute.
Oh yeah,
and it went like 30 minutes into the like mental game of let's just endure this. But when we got to the hot wash, I was sitting in the back of the class, and I've got my gear together, and people are talking, and I'm going, crap, I have to be mentally engaged right now. And slugging down water. But the hot wash portion he did was invaluable. And I've never had another instructor do that. I've never had another instructor that opened himself and his curriculum to absolute brutal criticism like that. So yeah, that really hit me in that positive manner of, hey man, you need to evaluate the stuff you're doing, and instead of just putting it out as a package, you need to open it for other people. I used to do a written course critique, and of course it's at the end of the day, it's hot, everybody's like, yeah, great course, yeah, cool, whatever. And I started implementing that, and I was like, ooh, I gotta really pivot some of my material. So yeah, that was probably 10,000 feet versus the 35-foot view. That was one of the most impactful things I've ever been through in any shooting course. So
to talk about just something that came out of that was questions about why I have folks zero when I do in the class. And I don't zero the optics at the start of the class, because one of the things I'm trying to do with folks is get them to look at the target, get them to look at the threat, and let the dot appear. And what I have found, and we had good discussion on it, was by putting off the zeroing, I get to reinforce for a while the looking at the target, looking at the threat, and letting the dot appear before I tell somebody to fixate on the dot.
And I've got a side note to that. I actually mounted up an optic system for Erick the night before a class, like a unvetted single sample of one to his gun. Hey, dude, will you mount this for me? Yeah, because I had my toolkit with me. And he shot that optic and gun combination the entire next day, and I couldn't tell that it wasn't zeroed. And I went, well, that's telling. Maybe people put a little too much emphasis on that a little too early, right? So I even had to use a file, and we won't go into that.
That was the optic, not the gun.
It was, but also a bit of, it triggered my gunsmithing artistry. So
Erick, I want to add a couple questions out of that, the discussion on the hot wash. How do you elicit the honest feedback and get the brutal feedback from students? Because it's, participating in those at the end of the deal, it's like, it's part of it is, confirmation bias. I think I get that. I'm like, hey man, everything I did for the last 2 days was great. This is awesome. And then there are typically some things that I would do differently, or that, as an instructor, as a student, I would say, hey, if this was here. But that feedback has never really been like pulled out of me, because I don't feel like it's my place. And I'd imagine the student in your class is kind of like, how dare I tell Erick what to do to his class? You know what I mean? So how are you getting that honest, that brutal feedback from folks?
So this is one of those things where the advantage of my background, and I was not a cool guy in the military. I was just an infantryman. I was a support guy at one place, but for the vast majority of career, it was an infantryman. And learning the after action review process, and then having been a cop in a couple of units where we made an effort to debrief stuff. So what I ask is, give me something positive about the class. Give me something I absolutely need to do the next time I teach this. All right. And then give me some, then once they answer that, depending on the size of the class, I'll either ask them, okay, give me something that I need to do better next time, or take out of the curriculum, or I'll go on to the next person. So I ask the questions. I give them the chance to say something cool first, something good, supportive first, then give them that. Now, usually the first couple of people will be like, oh, no, there's nothing bad. About the time I hit the fourth person, they've had a chance to think about it. And they're like, well, I didn't understand why you had us 0 on day 3 versus right out of the gate on day 2. Okay, well, here's why. Oh, okay. Get to the 5th guy. He answers it, right? Now, the person number 1's like, hey, can I jump in? I got something. So people will start seeing it, right? And that's one of the advantages, I guess, from just the experiences I've had, the variety of the experiences, is once people see that they can give you an opinion, give you their perception on something or perspective, and like, A, I'm taking notes, and B, I'm not telling them they're an idiot, right? For having that view, I may disagree with it, and I'll tell you why I did it versus, what you asked for. But I'm going to take the feedback. And if I sit down and look at my sheet of paper at the end of the day, and I got 5 people telling me, hey, this was buggered up, you need to do this differently. Right? One of the things I got was I wasn't clear on how I scored Justin Dial's roundup. I thought that was such a common drill that I didn't need to be. Now the class was like, hey, dude, we didn't know how you were going to score that. Okay, cool. Make sure I explain that. Right. So things along those lines, if that makes sense, Jeremy.
No, it does. I want to take the opportunity to plug the RangeBuddy app. If you got a question on how to score that, it's that and over 130 other drills, how to score them, how to shoot them, set them up in the RangeBuddy app. Brian, it looks like I just cut you off as you were about to expand on that.
No, I was going to go kind of into that hot wash. Erick is secure enough in his abilities that there were a few things, I won't say critiques, but there was a couple of little minor things that I went, this would have fit better here. And that would have led into the progression a little smoother. Or, hey man, I had a problem with this optic. And I sent him pictures of the optic and some other stuff. And a week later, he's sending me, hey, here's my presentation. Do you care if I use your pictures? No, man. You don't see a lot of instructors in the community of instructors that are willing to hang it out there to the point that, hey, it's almost peer reviewed if you've been in academia. And that was very impressive to me to see that. Yeah, okay, Erick and I are friends. We've already said that, but to go, hey, I saw this and I think it would have fit better here. Oh, okay. And then a couple other people go, I saw this and it would have fit better here. Hey guys, not for public. Here's my presentation and I've restructured it. Will you guys give me your input? And you're able to, as a student, immediately see the impact that you have on course curriculum. And that's highly rewarding as a normal earth person, so to speak, to see that, your input had influence on the way an instructor is going to impact future students. I've never had another instructor do that, not one time. And that meant a lot because it wasn't just me, it was other people in the class of different backgrounds. And it may be a guy that's never worked in law enforcement, never in LE, never pointed a gun at another human being, said, you know, in your learning curve, I had a problem here. And if you would have said this here, it would have made sense. And watching an instructor go, okay, here's my presentation for the next class. What do you think of that? Like, that was, one, it was refreshing. And two, that takes a degree of humility that not a lot of other instructors ever attain or implement. So yeah, thanks, Eric. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
No, and I'm being completely sincere about that. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't just, hey, Brian, you're my pal. Look at this and tell me what you think. It was people from all walks of life and their input saying, man, if you drove your curriculum like this, that would connect. And watching him go, okay, cool. Here's how I've restructured my stuff. Man, that hit me in the feels as an instructor. Like, oh, maybe I'm not as secure in the curriculum I teach as I should be. Maybe I need to open that up. So yeah. And for an instructor development course to be almost a peer-reviewed course was really, really powerful, man.
And I will say I was fortunate in that a number of the people that were in the class teaching, I knew were very competent instructors, both on the LE side and on the normal human side. Right. And they were friends.
Yeah.
So
some of them
were friends as well. So it was a peer-reviewed class. I don't necessarily think it started out that way, but it ended up definitely being that way. And having peers who could sit there and were willing to provide the feedback. So.
And you had the benefit, like I was telling some people when they said, what was it like being in Erick's class? And I said, dude, I got partnered with one of my heroes, Chuck Haggard. Yeah, he's a friend of mine, but he's also a peer and a colleague. And I've shot with the guy enough that when Erick would teach a concept, I could say, yo, Chuck, you're ducking your head when you're trying to find a dot or whatever. And then 20 minutes later, it's like, oh, Hanny McMood, one of my best friends on earth. Hey, bro, maybe keep your head upright because I just saw this with Chuck and I've shot with both y'all long enough to see that. And Hanny to go, hey, dude, you're not finishing your grip until right at the last second. Like maybe you should do that a little earlier because I've shot with you long enough to see those things. And Erick's ability to go, okay, it's time to switch partners. And
thank you.
And you're dealing with people that are not only colleagues and friends, but are people that you respect, that are higher level shooters, and people that are the same level and people that may be below your level of proficiency. And you're able to meld that into everybody. Rising tide rises all ships, right? I've never seen that in an instructor class before. Other than Tom Givens does that to an extent to get you exposure to new people, but not to that degree of minutia with people that were that proficient, right?
And that's where I shamelessly I stole that from was Tom. I had not seen rotating guys like that in any of the instructor classes I'd been through until I took Tom's, and I'm like, oh, I'm stealing that. That's perfect. Make people work with somebody else.
And a cool thing that happened with me and Chuck is I broke out my iPhone and I filmed Chuck, and then he broke out his iPhone and filmed me. And when Erick's going, all right, you guys, you got about 3 minutes to discuss what the exercise we just did. And we've got our iPhones out going, hey, bro, I've known you for 10 years and this is how you normally shoot. And this is what you're doing because of a pistol mounted optic. That was something that was invaluable. That really meant a lot to me. So anyway.
I want to, you might have covered some, and I think you did cover some of it, but what other ways has this course evolved over the years?
As I've seen, as I've gotten different results from students, seen different things from students, and also had a chance to work with different folks, and the way they've explained some things. So early on, it was built with some of the stuff some of the classes I'd been to before we flipped the switch on the gun sight program. Now, having had a chance to see the stuff with students, maybe hitting on some different areas. And it's even changed since the class that Brian was in. I had a chance to spend a weekend with Dave Spalding working on a dot. One probably was allegedly going to be his last optics class. And there were ways that Dave phrased some things that changed. Drills that I had used originally and kind of set aside because the amount of time and attention they require. Dave showed me a different way to present them, so I'm going to bring them back into the next class. So basically, if I had to narrow it down, it was watching student performance and finding different ways to reach them, and then hearing from other instructors. I won't call Dave Spalding a peer. I don't have that right. But watching other people in the business and being able to go, that's a better way of doing it. I'm going to adopt it.
Yes, you do have every right to call him a peer. Anyway.
Yeah, I'd say I'd agree with Brian on that. I'm sure Dave would agree with that as well. I know Andy's had
absolutely
the opportunity to train with Dave, and I'm hoping to catch him in 2024 in one of these surprise.
I don't know if he's gonna. Yeah, if you see another class of his open up, jump into it with both feet.
Yeah,
I don't know how many more of them there are going to be.
I would be surprised if he does more than 2 next year, and this is just all me guessing, but I missed out on an opportunity. He was up in Colorado a few months last month, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping something like that happens up. So,
I talked to him at NRA pretty extensively. We have kind of a business relationship, and his take was, I'm not going to put much effort into traveling anymore. Yeah. Might do a couple of classes 30 minutes from home a year, but it might be nobody hears about it, and it might just be people I invite.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of respect for Dave, but yeah, if you get the opportunity to train with Dave, you need to do it now.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I will say the cool thing about that trip back to Ohio for Dave's optics class was a bunch of us ended up going and catching a baseball game that night, and Dave kind of put that whole thing together. So we had a bunch of gun guys doing decidedly non-gun stuff at a baseball game.
That's cool, man.
I got to say, I talked to Dave 2019 before he was doing optic work, and him and one of his trusted cohorts were like, we're not going to listen to the rest of the industry.
Yep.
We're going to go figure this out.
They did.
Yeah. And I admire that in somebody that goes, I don't want to get tainted with the information that's out there. I'm going to go discover it for myself. And being as proficient level of instructor that he is, I think he offers a really good pistol-mounted optics package. So
I know we've been on here for about an hour and a half. I definitely want to give you guys the rest of your evening back before we steal any more of your time. Before we do that, though, I want to make sure that we gave the course its full due respect. Is there anything that we should have talked about that we maybe didn't touch on? Kick that over to Eric, and then Brian, I want to follow up the same question to you.
So from my perspective, I think we got it. The emphasis was on whether it was normal human or law enforcement, was teaching people to teach the optic and how it's likely to be used defensively. So how to get the pistol mounted optic into play from a ready position from the holster, right? How to work it in different positions. How how to deal with any failures, mechanical or electronic of the optic or environmental, how to use it for accuracy, how to use it on multiple or moving targets, right? How to work the different positions, and importantly, how to teach that, right? The classroom stuff covers policy development. It covers maintenance development. Does the person teaching a 4-hour optic class at their local range need to know policy? Probably not, but they need to understand the legal aspects of stuff. But they also are going to need to talk to their students about how do you put that optic on, right? Do you use thread locker? Is the plate that comes with the gun the best choice? Do you torque it? How do you deal with cleaning the lens? Right? That's all stuff that has to be covered from an operational perspective or at an organizational perspective more than a performance perspective. Once you get all that stuff down, right, then we can start working on pure speed, which isn't bad. Just there's other things that have to happen before you get there. So while I'm not going to say I'm completely happy with the class and I'm never going to change it, I'm happy with how the class has evolved and is continuing to evolve. And if I see things that need to be changed going forward, I will make those changes, make those additions. But I think the class as it's structured, which is how to teach somebody to teach the use of the dot and bringing it into an organization is pretty solid where it's at.
Beautiful. Brian, what about you? Do we miss anything that we should have talked about?
Man, I'll put it this way. If people understood the depth of knowledge that one Erick Gelhaus has to offer, there would not be another pistol mounted optic instructor in the entire industry. And I'm not being the least bit contrite about that. You can drive levels of performance and speed. But when it comes to the total package, am I a local gun range guy that teaches a 4-hour block a couple times a month to am I at the highest levels of like government operation or institutional operation? He covers all the bases. He lays all the groundwork. And I've never seen another instructor in the industry that does that. That prefaces a lecture with, hey, normal Earth people, this may not be for you, but you may encounter these people. So here's how we write sound policy for an agency. Here's the benefits for an agency if you happen to encounter those people too. Okay, you're those people in the agency. Let me show you how to implement this in a manner that isn't related to some arbitrary performance standard. Let me show you how to write sound policy, how to write court tested policy, how to justify this for an agency, what the benefits are, what the drawbacks are, and then go and pressure test those all under the guise of you have Erick watching over a bunch of instructor level people. I've never seen an instructor level course like that. And as soon as people figure out how good that is, I'll probably talk to Erick every 6 months instead of every week. And I don't say that to be contrite just because he's a friend of mine, but because that's how good the quality of information is. I tell a lot of people when they go, hey man, my agency wants to approve red dots. I'm thinking about bringing in instructor XYZ. I go, why don't you bring in this guy? Who's that? Oh, well, let me tell you about his background and here's what he'll offer for you. Yeah, give me his phone number. Versus, well, the latest Instagram celebrity says this is the important stuff. So that to me was majorly impactful. And I don't I don't deal a lot with red dots other than in people that come to a class running a pistol mounted optic. I do it somewhat, but now I have the confidence to go, oh, you can't find the dot. Let me show you how to figure that out. Let me show you the process to go through to figure that out versus what's your build arrow time? What's your what's your sub-second draw? Yeah, all that kind of goes to the wayside of, let me show you a structured program, and all the way from how to mount an optic to how to write agency policy to how to relate that to normal earth people. And there's nobody else doing that other than Erick right there. So I can't say enough good about the class. I feel more confident as an instructor because I went to an instructor course that taught me how to teach. There's a novel concept. Then the package that he offers. So, God, what else good could I say? I mean, that's kind of the gist of it. But and again, I don't say that just because Erick and I have nerd conversations about why did the Weaver get twisted out of context? You know, why did this get twisted out of context? You know, we have pretty much weekly conversations about deep level gun nerd stuff. But when I went to his course, I was pleasantly surprised that he taught me how to teach people to shoot a pistol mounted optic. Like, that's kind of the course advertisement, right? So anyway, nice, I could rattle on for another 2 hours about how great that course was, but
no, that's cool, man. And it's refreshing to hear, man, because it's oftentimes you do take a class and it's like, I thought I was signing up for this class and that's not at all what I got. So, Andy, I want to kick it back over to you. Go ahead.
Or I signed up for an instructor course and I shot a bunch of proficiencies.
Yeah.
Okay. Show me what you can do. And Erick really threw us into the pressure cooker with switching up students to, here's an exercise. You go teach your buddy how to shoot that. And then when you're done, we're going to have a 20-minute discussion about, what did you see? What did you see? How did you do that? How did you address what was going on? There's been, out of all the open enrollment training I've ever taken, there's been about 2 courses that did that. So, and his was one. So there you go.
Nice. I think that speaks volumes to the passion and the integrity that you have, Erick, which is cool to see. Andy messaged me a minute ago. He's like, dude, I know we say this often, but we got to get into this class. And I said, yeah, we've got to go take a RangeMaster advanced level instructor course, this year to make that happen.
Or send an email to Erick and just say, hey, can I get vetted for this? I think I'm a good gun handler.
But like, hey, Brian told me inside baseball, this is how I get into it. But Andy, do you have any final thoughts before we jump off here?
As soon as we shut down, Erick's going to be like, hey, edit that part out.
I have no editorial control. I know
Hey,
that.
even the white girl's laughing, okay? So
that's awesome. Hey, well, guys, this was a great show. As usual, we only choose the best, or mostly the best, just saying. So we're kind of joking in the beginning of the pre-show that we've been doing this a few years and we're starting to get in a really good swing of things. And Erick was like, oh, scraping the bottom of the barrel, huh? So I'm like, for now, I feel like we're starting to get to the cream of the crop, and I appreciate you guys coming on. So it was a huge honor to have you guys both on, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Hey, Andy, Jeremy, I just want to say thanks for having me on. And we had to do a change with who we had on as from the student side, just because Bill wasn't available. But not only that, I just want to take a moment to thank your listeners who at this point are putting up with about an hour and 30-something minutes of Brian and I rambling about the class. So again, thanks for the opportunity and thanks to them for listening.
man, it was a great episode. I know that because you all carried the conversation. And at any time Andy or I have to do a lot of talking, it's like, oh man, this is gonna be a crap show. So I appreciate you guys so much for the insight, the knowledge, the expertise that you shared with us and our listeners. I will have this up in the next couple hours for the audio only version. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection. It's Memphis Beach jumped on earlier. He said stellar panel tonight, and then Not Ramble's wisdom, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. Memphis, thank you so much for sticking with us the entire time. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. We'll see you next week, and I think Memphis will be joining us as a student in one of the upcoming episodes again. So that'll be looking forward to that. So you have a great night, and we will see you. We'll see y'all next week.